You thought you could hide it, but something inside them already knew. It wasn't a guess, it wasn't paranoia, it was a full-body alarm system firing on every level: physical, emotional, energetic. The moment deception enters the room, an empath doesn't just sense it, they experience it. Like a frequency that doesn't match, like a note played wrong in a symphony they've been hearing their entire life. Their stomach tightens, their chest feels heavy. There's a tension in the air they can't explain, but they feel it crawling up their spine. And while you're sitting there, carefully choosing your words, rehearsing your story, making sure everything sounds believable, they're already watching the truth spill out in ways you didn't even realize. The way your voice shifted, the way your eyes moved, the way the energy between you both suddenly became sharp and cold. They don't need evidence. They don't need proof. Because their body is the evidence. And it's screaming. Most people think empaths are naive, that they're too trusting, too open, too willing to believe the best in everyone. But that's not naivety. That's not weakness. It's awareness wrapped in hope. It's the conscious choice to give people space to tell the truth before calling out the lie. Because empaths know something most people don't. Lies have weight, and the person carrying them always reveals it, even when they think they don't. You can rehearse the words, you can control your face, but you can't control the feeling you give off. And that's what an empath reads, not your script, not your explanation, the truth beneath it. The dissonance between what you say and what you are. Lying to an empath isn't just unwise, it's exhausting. Because no matter how well you think you hid it, they already felt the crack, and now they're deciding whether to say something, or just quietly watch you dig deeper. They wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of everything they absorbed the day before. Every conversation, every glance, every shift in someone's tone that others didn't even notice. It all stays with them, like residue they can't wash off. Living as an empath isn't just about feeling deeply. It's about carrying things that were never yours to carry. Walking into a room and immediately knowing something is wrong even when everyone is smiling. Sitting across from someone and feeling their sadness before they say a word. Listening to a story and knowing there's another version underneath it, the real one they're not telling. And the hardest part? No one believes you when you say it. So you learn to stay quiet. You learn to nod. You learn to pretend you don't see what you see. Because the moment you speak up, the moment you say, something feels off, you become the problem. You become too much, too intense, too sensitive, overthinking again. But you're not overthinking. You're reading what's actually there. And that's the loneliest realization of all. They've been lied to so many times they lost count. By partners who swore nothing was wrong while pulling away inch by inch. By friends who smiled to their face and spoke differently behind their back. By family members who insisted everything was fine, while the tension in the room pressed down like a weight no one else seemed to feel. And every single time, their body knew first. That sinking feeling in their chest, that tightness in their throat, that voice inside whispering, "This doesn't feel right." But they ignored it, because everyone else seemed so sure, so confident, so convincing. So they doubted themselves instead. They replayed conversations in their mind, searching for proof, analyzing every word, every pause, every facial expression, trying to find the logical explanation for why their gut was screaming at them. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe they were being unfair. Maybe they were the one with the problem. And that's the cruelest part of being lied to as an empath. It's not just the deception. It's the self-betrayal that follows. The moment you choose to believe someone else's words over your own knowing. The moment you gaslight yourself into thinking you're imagining things. The moment you apologize for feeling what you feel. Because when you're an empath, people don't just lie to you. They make you feel guilty for noticing. Each lie left a mark. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet. A small crack in their ability to trust. A little more weight added to the exhaustion they already carried. Another reminder that the world doesn't work the way they do. That most people say what's convenient, not what's true. That honesty isn't the default, it's the exception. And over time, those cracks start to add up. The exhaustion deepens. The confusion becomes constant. Am I too sensitive? Am I seeing things that aren't there? Why does everything feel so heavy? But it's not sensitivity, it's clarity. And clarity, when no one else sees it, feels like madness. They learn to shrink themselves, to question their instincts, to stop saying what they felt because it always ended the same way, being told they were wrong, being told they were overreacting, being told they needed to relax, to let it go, to stop reading into things. So they did. They stopped speaking up. They stopped trusting the signals their body sent. They stayed in situations that drained them. They gave chance after chance to people who never deserved the first one. They smiled when their chest felt tight. They stayed quiet when their intuition screamed. And the weight kept building. Because that's what happens when you're an empath in a world that rewards deception. You don't just absorb other people's emotions. You absorb their lies, their half-truths, their performances, and you carry all of it alone, wondering if you're the only one who sees it. You're not imagining it. You never were. Your body was telling you the truth the whole time, but you were taught not to listen. You were taught that your sensitivity was the problem, that your intuition was unreliable, that you needed proof before you could trust yourself. But the truth doesn't need proof. It just needs you to stop apologizing for feeling it. There's a reason they kept lying to you. And it wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't just because you happened to meet the wrong people. It was a pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. People lie to empaths because they know empaths will try to understand. They know empaths will give them the benefit of the doubt. They know empaths will bend, adjust, and make space for explanations that don't quite add up. And more than anything, they know empaths will absorb the discomfort of the lie rather than create conflict by calling it out. That's not weakness, but they mistake it for weakness. And that mistake is exactly why they choose you. Because empaths don't just feel deeply, they care deeply. And people who lie, people who manipulate, people who hide behind performances, they can smell that care from a mile away. They see your empathy and think, this person will tolerate more, this person will forgive more, this person won't push too hard. And they're right, until they're not. But here's what most people don't understand. Lying to an empath isn't just about avoiding the truth. It's about control. It's about keeping you confused just enough that you stop trusting yourself. It's about making you question your reality so they never have to face theirs. Because the moment you see them clearly, the moment you stop accepting the version of themselves they've carefully constructed, the game is over. And they know that, so they lie. Not just with words, but with tone, with timing, with the energy they bring into the room. They lie by what they don't say, by the details they skip, by the way they shift the subject just when you're about to ask the question that matters. And you feel all of it. You feel the micro pause before they answer, the slight change in their voice when they're saying something they don't mean, the way their energy shifts when they're hiding something, like a door closing softly in a quiet hallway. You don't always have the words for it, you can't always explain it, but your body registers it every single time. That's the pattern. That's the signature. Lies have a frequency, and empaths are tuned to it whether they realize it or not. It's in the way someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, the way their words sound rehearsed, just a little too perfect, the way they over-explain something simple or under-explain something significant, the way their body language contradicts what they're saying, arms crossed while claiming they're open, eyes looking away while insisting they're being honest. Empaths notice, not because they're paranoid, but because inconsistency creates dissonance, and dissonance is impossible to ignore when you're wired to feel everything. Here's the truth most people won't tell you. Empaths are not chosen despite their depth. They're chosen because of it. Because people who operate in deception need someone who will absorb their chaos, someone who will carry the emotional labor of their lies, someone who will make sense of the nonsense so they don't have to take accountability for creating it. That's why the same types kept showing up in your life. The ones who needed you to be their emotional translator. The ones who wanted your empathy but feared your perception. The ones who loved that you could feel them but hated that you could see them. Because empathy without boundaries looks like availability, and liars, manipulators, and emotionally unavailable people are drawn to availability like it's oxygen. But here's where the shift begins. The moment you recognize the pattern, it loses its power. The moment you stop wondering if you're overthinking and start trusting that you're actually underreacting, everything changes, because you realize you weren't confused. You were just being lied to. And there's a massive difference. Confusion isn't a character flaw. It's a symptom of being in the presence of someone who refuses to tell the truth. You were never too sensitive. You were surrounded by people who were too dishonest. You were never overanalyzing. You were picking up on exactly what was there. The tonal shifts, the behavioral inconsistencies, the energetic mismatches. All of it was real. All of it mattered. And your body was doing exactly what it was designed to do, alerting you to danger that everyone else was too distracted to notice. The pattern reveals itself the moment you stop blaming yourself for feeling it. And once you see it clearly, you stop accepting it silently. You stop making excuses for people who wouldn't tell you the truth if their life depended on it. You stop choosing their comfort over your clarity. And that's when everything shifts. Because empaths who trust their intuition don't get fooled twice. They just stop playing the game altogether. There comes a moment when everything stops. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when something clicks into place that was always supposed to be there. And suddenly you realize, I wasn't wrong. I was right all along. Every instinct you doubted, every feeling you dismissed, every time your body told you something was off and you ignored it because someone else seemed so certain, so calm, so convincing, you were right. Not paranoid, not overthinking, not too sensitive. Right. And that realization doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like grief, because it means all those times you apologized for what you felt, you were apologizing for seeing the truth. All those times you talked yourself out of your intuition, you were betraying the one voice that never lied to you. All those times you stayed when everything inside you said leave, you were choosing their comfort over your survival. You weren't the problem. You were just surrounded by people who needed you to think you were. This is the turning point. The moment when the weight you've been carrying finally gets a name, and that name isn't sensitivity. It's not overreaction, it's clarity. And clarity, once you stop running from it, becomes the most powerful thing you'll ever own. Because here's what no one tells you about being an empath. You were never supposed to doubt yourself this much. You were never supposed to shrink your awareness to make other people comfortable. You were never supposed to apologize for seeing what they were too afraid to admit. But that's exactly what you were taught to do. Society doesn't reward empaths for their perception. It punishes them. You were told to stop being so emotional, stop reading into things, stop making people feel uncomfortable with your questions, stop expecting too much, stop feeling so deeply, stop, as if your gift was a defect, as if your ability to see beneath the surface was something to be ashamed of. And so you learned to ignore it. You learned to second-guess every signal your body sent. You learned to numb yourself just enough to fit into a world that didn't want to be seen that clearly. You dimmed your light because people kept telling you it was too bright. But it was never too bright. It was just shining on things they wanted to keep hidden. They told you that you were too much, that you felt too deeply, that you expected too much honesty, too much consistency, too much truth. But the reality is simpler and sharper than that. You were always enough. You were always exactly what you needed to be. And they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle being seen. They couldn't handle being felt. They couldn't handle someone who didn't accept the performance, who didn't settle for surface-level connection, who didn't pretend not to notice when something didn't align. So they made it about you. They made you believe your depth was the problem, when the real problem was their shallowness. And you believed them. Because empaths are wired to consider every perspective except their own. Because you'd rather doubt yourself than hurt someone else. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that keeping the peace was more important than keeping your truth. But peace built on self-betrayal isn't peace, it's surrender. And this is the moment you stop surrendering. This is the moment you stop asking yourself if you're overthinking and start asking why they're under-explaining. This is the moment you stop wondering if you're too sensitive and start recognizing that they're too dishonest. This is the moment the pain you've been carrying transforms into something sharper, clearer, stronger. It's not bitterness. It's not anger. It's self-respect. And self-respect, when you've spent years without it, feels like coming home to a version of yourself you forgot existed. You start trusting the tightness in your chest. You start honoring the hesitation before you say yes. You start listening to the voice that whispers something's off, instead of the voice that says, give them another chance. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never confused. You stop defending your boundaries to people who never intended to respect them. And slowly, everything begins to shift. The people who drained you start feeling uncomfortable around you. The ones who lied start avoiding you. The ones who manipulated start keeping their distance. Not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, but because your energy changed. And people who operate in deception can't survive around someone who operates in clarity. You didn't become cold. You became conscious. You didn't lose your empathy. You just stopped giving it to people who weaponized it. You didn't close your heart. You built a gate. And only the real ones know the code. This is where pain becomes power. This is where confusion becomes certainty. This is where everything you thought was wrong about you becomes the exact thing that sets you free. You weren't too much. You were just in rooms too small. And the moment you stop shrinking to fit, the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space, the moment you trust yourself the way you've always trusted everyone else, everything changes. Because empaths who know their worth don't just survive, they transform. And the world has no choice but to adjust. Something shifts, not on the outside, on the inside, where it matters most. They stop explaining, not because they're angry, not because they've given up on communication, but because they finally understand that people who want to misunderstand you will do so no matter how clearly you speak. And people who want to see you will see you without needing a presentation. The old version would have spent hours trying to make someone understand, rehearsing what to say, softening the edges, choosing words carefully so no one felt attacked, apologizing for feeling what they feel, justifying boundaries that should have never needed justification, bending and adjusting and shrinking just to keep the peace. But this version stays quiet, not out of fear, out of power, because silence, when used intentionally, is the loudest response you can give. It says, I don't owe you access, I don't owe you explanations, I don't owe you comfort at the expense of my clarity. And the people who were used to taking up all your space suddenly don't know what to do when you stop making room. They start to notice the shift immediately. The ones who got used to you chasing, the ones who expected you to fix everything, the ones who always had access, always had your energy, always had you available. Suddenly you're not cold, not distant, just unavailable for the games you used to play. This is the awakening of boundaries, and it doesn't happen with aggression. It doesn't require anger or confrontation or grand declarations. It happens quietly, calmly, with a certainty that doesn't need to be loud because it's rooted in something unshakable, self-respect. Observation becomes strategy now. Where they used to react, they now watch. Where they used to absorb every emotion in the room, they now choose what they let in. Where they used to carry other people's chaos, they now let people hold their own weight. And it feels strange at first, almost uncomfortable, because for so long they defined themselves by how much they gave, how much they understood, how much space they could make for others. Their worth was measured in how helpful they were, how patient, how forgiving. And now they're learning that their worth was never tied to how much they tolerated. The new version doesn't rush to fill the silence, doesn't jump to fix what isn't theirs to fix, doesn't offer energy to people who never valued it in the first place. They watch, they listen, they feel, but they don't absorb, they don't carry, they don't take responsibility for other people's refusal to be honest. They stop defending their boundaries. Because boundaries aren't up for debate. They're not suggestions, they're not requests, they're statements. And statements don't require permission. When someone crosses a line, they don't get an essay about why it hurt. They get distance. When someone lies, they don't get a chance to explain it away. They get silence. When someone tries to manipulate, guilt trip, or gaslight, they don't get an emotional reaction. They get nothing. Because nothing is the only response manipulation deserves. The old version was desperate for validation, anxious, constantly second-guessing, wondering if they were doing too much or not enough, apologizing for having needs, asking permission to take up space, grateful when people treated them with basic respect as if it was a gift instead of a standard. But this version doesn't ask. They decide. They decide who gets access. They decide what behavior they'll tolerate. They decide how much of themselves they'll share. And they do it all without guilt, without explanation, without the need to convince anyone that they deserve what they're asking for. Because they're not asking anymore. They're simply being. And being, when it's rooted in self-respect, doesn't negotiate. Their energy changes. People feel it even when nothing is said. The way they hold themselves, the way they respond or don't. The way they're no longer afraid of disappointing people who were never afraid of disappointing them. The way they stop making themselves smaller so others can feel bigger. It's not arrogance. It's alignment. It's the quiet confidence that comes from finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. And the people who benefited from the old version panic. They test the boundaries. They push. They say things like, "You've changed." And they're right. But they say it like it's a bad thing. Like the version of you that tolerated disrespect was better. Like the version of you that gave endlessly and got nothing in return was easier to manage. And it was. But easy for them meant exhausting for you. And you're done being exhausted. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. And this version has learned to filter ruthlessly. Not everyone gets in. Not everyone gets your time. Not everyone gets the gift of your empathy, your patience, your understanding. Because those things are sacred. And sacred things don't get handed out to people who treat them like they're disposable. The ones who truly care will adjust. They'll respect the shift. They'll meet you where you are without demanding you go back to where you were. And the ones who don't, they'll remove themselves. And you'll let them. Not with sadness, with relief. Because this is what sovereignty looks like. This is what happens when an empath stops giving their power away. This is the transformation that changes everything. You stop performing empathy. You start embodying boundaries. You stop seeking approval. You start trusting your discernment. You stop explaining. You start existing, fully, unapologetically, on your own terms, and the world adjusts, because it has no other choice. An empath who knows their worth is unstoppable, not because they've become ruthless, but because they've become unreachable by anything that isn't real. Their sensitivity, the very thing people called weakness, becomes the sharpest tool they own. They read intention before a word is spoken. They detect patterns others miss. They see through facades with surgical precision. And they do it all without effort, without force, without needing to prove anything to anyone. This is strategic empathy, not empathy as absorption, empathy as discernment, the ability to feel what's happening without becoming what's happening. To understand someone's pain without carrying it, to see someone's game without playing it. And when deceivers realize the empath is no longer playing, confusion, frustration, even fear. Because people who manipulate rely on your reaction. They need you emotional. They need you explaining. They need you engaged. But when you give them nothing, no defense, no anger, no performance, they have nothing to work with. They expected the old version, the one who bent, the one who absorbed, the one who tried so hard to make things work. But this version doesn't try. This version observes, decides, moves accordingly, and that shift in energy is something manipulators can feel even when they can't name it. Empaths become masters of energy, conversation, and self-protection without losing their humanity. They didn't close their hearts. They just became selective about who gets close to them. And that selectivity is the power no one saw coming. This is what a fully evolved empath looks like: calm, grounded, impossible to manipulate. They no longer need validation from people who barely validate themselves. They no longer over-explain to people who were never confused. They trust themselves completely. And that trust radiates in a way words never could. People feel the difference, even when nothing is said. The way they carry themselves, the way they hold space without filling it, the way their presence alone makes dishonest people uncomfortable. Liars avoid them. Users keep their distance. Energy vampires find someone else to feed on. But authentic souls, they move closer. Because real recognizes real. And empaths who've done the work, who've reclaimed their power, who've stopped apologizing for their depth, they attract depth, effortlessly. They didn't become colder. They became wiser. They didn't lose their softness. They built a fortress around it. They didn't stop caring. They stopped caring about people who never cared back. This is the final evolution, not hardness, sovereignty, not bitterness, clarity, not isolation, selectivity. They still feel everything. They just don't let everything in. And that distinction changes everything. Transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more of who you were before the world convinced you to be less. Empaths were never meant to be prey. They were meant to be guardians of truth, protectors of what's real, holders of depth in a world that runs on surfaces. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were exactly what you needed to be in a world that didn't know what to do with someone who could see past the masks. Here's the truth you'll carry forever. The world will lie to you. People will perform. They'll craft narratives. They'll say what sounds good instead of what's true. But your body will never betray you. It will tell you when something's off, when someone's energy doesn't match their words, when you need to walk away even when everyone else is staying. Trust that. Trust yourself the way you've always trusted everyone else. Trust your intuition the way you trusted their explanations. Trust the signals your body sends before your mind talks you out of them. And if you're reading this and something inside you is stirring, if you're remembering a moment when you ignored what you felt and paid the price, drop it in the comments. Not for me, for you, for the person reading who needs to know they're not alone, for the empath who's still doubting themselves. Because the moment you stop apologizing for your awareness is the moment everything changes. Never apologize for seeing what others tried to hide. That's not sensitivity, that's sight.